Today is Tuesday, September 21st at 5 o'clock p.m. And I'd like to call to order the Administration Committee meeting. Can we have a roll call, please?
Supervisor Long.
Present.
Supervisor Cook.
Present.
Supervisor Ard.
Present.
Supervisor Peterson.
Here.
Supervisor Peavy.
Here.
We have a quorum.
As far as the minutes, we have two to review and approve, Tuesday, August 17th, and also Wednesday, August 25th. Anyone have any comments or corrections or suggestions on the minutes? All right, hearing none, the minutes will stand as approved as written. Public comment. Always have an opportunity to hear public comment, and don't get a lot once in a while, maybe. Any public comment? Anyone from the public like to make any comments? All right, we'll move on to our business items. And the first will be an update on the broadband study. Jack Matum, am I pronouncing that correctly? From Design 9.
Good evening. So in April, we engaged Design 9 for a comprehensive broadband study for St. Croix County. One of the deliverables for that project was a survey of our residents to find out their point of view on the broadband needs for St. Croix County, and we sent that survey off to, I think, 35,000 residents and 700-800 businesses in the county. Received a really good response from that. I think it was close to 15 or 16% on the residential side and 7 or 8% on the business side. And we consolidated all that data, Design 9 did, consolidated all that data into a document which was shared through social media and on the public website, and the link was sent to all the supervisors to review. I don't think it was included in the packet because it was 160 pages, but just the link was, yeah. You know, it highlighted pretty starkly the need for broadband in the rural areas and even in some of the highly populated areas where there were deficits highlighted in that from neighborhood to neighborhood, even though they were right down the street from each other. So there's a definite need, and there's some definite attention that needs to be paid to the needs in the county and as a whole, not just in the heavily populated areas. I think we really need to pay some attention to the rural areas that are grossly underserved at this time. And hopefully the next phase of the project, which Jack is going to talk about in a minute here, will provide a plan to help bridge the gap while we work to build infrastructure and work with our service providers and maybe even invite some new service providers into the area to cover some of the neglected areas in the county that have, you know, frankly been neglected for years, and it's all due to money. There's just not enough money for the service providers to make it profitable for them to do it. So there's going to have to be some type of partnership that comes out of this, and I think that the study will show that as we get that last segment of it. And yeah, did you guys have any questions on what was contained in the broadband survey that we got from the residents? Mr. Long?
I just had one question. It seemed to substantiate what we thought about our residents in the county and some of the frustrations and whatnot. Did it give any direction as to what approaches might be appropriate as far as solutions?
That's the next phase of the project. They're building a comprehensive plan for a strategy that we could take to provide broadband to everybody in the county, and that's the part that we'll get mid to late October. That's what we're thinking right now, late October. So right now, the part that we've already published is the survey of our residents and businesses, just highlighting their needs, and right now as we speak, they've completed a tower study for doing fixed wireless to the rural areas. They're looking at geographic topography to help plan that part of it out. We're looking at fiber routes throughout the county on how to backhaul all the data from the rural areas into a point where we can hop on the internet, because it's not just a matter of getting fiber to your house. We've got to figure out how to connect you to the pipe that runs along 94 or in Amory or in Somerset, wherever that's backhauling to. So that's the piece that's coming late next month. And that'll be I believe, the last part of the last deliverable of this, that the county will be able to come up with an action plan based on that and start working. Hopefully, fiber season's just about over. It ends about the first week of December around here. So we'll hopefully be able to work through the winter to develop a plan with our service providers and figure out how we can partner with them, figure out where that ARPA money that's been earmarked or is hopefully earmarked for this project will be best spent, and come up with a plan to deliver broadband to everybody in the county. Questions? Jack? So Jack Madam is with Design 9. He can give a little bit of an overview. We're trying to work with one municipality in the county to provide on paper a pilot project that would show what this looks like and what fiber to the doorstep would cost for that municipality. We met with City of New Richmond today, just as a sample to discuss that opportunity with them, and they're going to think about it for the next few days and get back with Jack and let them know whether or not they're interested in being that pilot municipality. We may also solicit some other municipalities too, and Jack can go into that a little more.
Sure. Thank you, John. I second everything that John said about the report. That we've completed the preliminary phase. I was here for the first time back in May, and we had about 26 meetings with various stakeholders in the community. We met with a half dozen internet service providers. We met with people in public safety from the county, from municipalities. So we got a pretty coherent perspective from their point of view about where the gaps were in the broadband for the county. So we've taken that information together with the survey, which we've delivered. As John said, it's about 160 pages, about half of which are comments that people have made to the survey, which are very interesting. So if you can't sleep some night, you might want to break that out and take a look at it, because I think you might find some interesting comments in there. In addition to that, early on, we did an internet service provider report where we analyzed by zip code all of the internet services that were available from various providers, the money that they charge for the service and what level of service they provided, whether it was DSL, digital subscriber line, whether it was a fixed wireless service, whether it was a fiber service. And we put all that together in a report. And in that report, there's always one very interesting page which explains the 30-year estimated telecom expenses by residences in St. Croix County. And it provides detail as to the cost for various types of services going over the 34,000 residences. And if we scroll down to the end of that, then the total over the 30 years comes to just over $2.5 billion that's going to be spent on broadband. So if the county can capture a small portion of that, then you could have the best broadband network in the world. That, in addition to all of the public funding that we think is going to be available from Washington to the tune of roughly $65 billion, assuming we even have a functioning government after October 1st, but assuming that we do, there should be a considerable amount of money that's available. And if we have a good plan, there's absolutely no reason why St. Croix shouldn't be further up the line in the ability to collect some of that money. As John said, we've also done propagation studies, that's wireless testing, over the course of the whole county. We've analyzed each of the towers that are currently available, what they're used for, who owns them. And on the basis of the propagation studies, we've determined where there should be some additional towers placed. So this is the report here. And It's color-coded by whether the towers currently exist, whether they're on private land, whether they need to be enhanced so that they can then support more wireless radios and antennas that wireless internet service providers can use to increase their level of service in the more rural parts of the area. And as John said, this is the actual propagation study. So you can see in the eastern portions of the county that given the fixed wireless plan that we've proposed, we should be able to cover the entire eastern and central portion of the county with decent fixed wireless service. Decent fixed wireless service at this stage means somewhere in the order of 25 to 50 megabits down and somewhere in the order of 3 to 10 megabits up. We think that in conjunction with perhaps some additional fiber, particularly in the core, can provide St. Croix with a world-class broadband system. So we don't intend to propose that you replace the existing providers. We want to analyze those gaps in the broadband service that currently exists and identify in conjunction with the providers where we could perhaps put in some infrastructure, perhaps some additional fiber, some additional towers that they can take advantage of to offer additional services to residents and businesses in the county. So that's the goal. We're more than halfway there. And as John said, if we can identify some areas in the county where we can generate some very detailed plans for what it would cost to build a fiber network, we can provide you with those costs over a 10-year period, and you can make some more intelligent financial decisions based on those. So as John said, I hope to be back here later in October with the final plan, and I can answer any questions that you might have about it now. Thank you very much for your support, and
I do have a couple of questions, if I may.
sure.
And this is maybe a real basic question, but what really determines availability of providers for internet? So, for example, I live in the town of Hudson. You know, I have Baldwin Lightstream available, which I use. What determines what other providers might be available to me?
Well, as I said, in the internet service provider report that we've done, we analyze that by zip code. So if you look at that report, you'll see, if you pick your zip code, I don't think all of the zip codes are there, at least the survey.
I don't think I've
out.
received that. I looked for that today, and
Yeah.
I don't think I've received that. So maybe
Okay,
you get
all right, then I'll be sure you get that. It's one of the reasons I'm here, is to be sure that the information follows along. But anyway, in that internet service provider report, it does analyze in detail all of the providers in each zip code, what service they provide, and what the approximate price is for a package of service, based on whether you're just having broadband, whether you're getting a triple play, whether it's a wireless service, or whether it's a cellular service. So you can look at that report and get a good determination as to who's in your neighborhood as far as providers and what sorts of services they offer. Now, the fact that they may not be at your neighborhood, or certainly in your house, that's really a decision. That's a business decision they make. They determine where they're going to go. And where they're going to go depends on a lot of variables. The income in the residences in the area, the infrastructure that's available, the competition, et cetera. We tend to think the competition's a great thing. So if we can get 2 or more providers, we built a network in Bozeman, Montana, which now has 6 internet service providers on it for businesses. So it can be done. It's just that the service providers would like you to think that it can't be done. So that, I think, looking at that internet service provider report will give you a good indication as to what's available and what's nearby and how much it costs.
And just out of curiosity, how closely have you been working with our existing providers in the county in developing your plan?
Well, when I came here first time at the end of May, we met with most of the primary. We met with Baldwin, Northwest. We met with a couple of wireless service providers, one of them from over in Hastings in Minnesota. We, of course, extended invitations to all of them, but typically most of the more well-known national providers tend not to be too cooperative in that regard.
They didn't show up at the table.
I've noticed a big change in that, though, from when I first started doing this work about 8 years ago. We just got a stiff arm. They didn't want to contribute at all. They sometimes went around and tried to discourage anyone from working with us. That's changed. They now generally do at least meet with us individually, and in some cases they do. They're a little bit more forthcoming in terms of what their plans are in the future. So I think that the attitude is changing in that if the county or a municipality is willing, perhaps, to fund some infrastructure, they will take advantage of that, and they'll use that to offer additional services to more potential clients in the county and the cities. So yes, we have worked with providers, and we intend to continue working with them as much as possible.
Supervisor Peterson.
Not quite as tech savvy as I should be anymore, but I think you mentioned fixed wireless. Can you just kind of give a broad overview of how that compares to DSL and
Sure.
all these new terms? It's kind of hard to keep up with all that.
It certainly is, even for me. Fixed wireless means that there's an antenna that's on a tower, and that radio sends a signal out to residences which have receivers on their house or in their business, and they can receive that radio signal, and they get internet from that. And then from the tower, the information that comes back to that radio, if you're sending information back, then that gets connected to a central office. It can either be connected by another wireless tower, or it could be directly connected to fiber. But ultimately, that information coming back from the local resident has to get over the internet, and that generally has to go through a central office. So it's a combination of both radios on towers and fiber, which connects the towers to the internet, or intermittently it could be a radio. Fiber is always more effective. It handles much more data, but putting up a wireless tower and making the connections can be a lot quicker, especially in rural areas.
Supervisor Cook.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this report and seeing what your recommendations are. You mentioned, we're talking about fixed wireless. You mentioned 25.3 as a potential speed if we're talking about fixed wireless. And I understand from an ease of implementation to cover the most area, I understand that. But 25.3, although it meets the federal guidelines for served, I mean, in your opinion, do you see that as something that is really going to serve our residents in the future? If we're going to spend a bunch of money, it's ARPA money, it's kind of maybe once in a lifetime chance to get this money.
No.
Do you think that's a good enough goal for us to be looking at? It seems like it's not really recognizing all the devices folks have, and download and upload speed. 3 seems very slow for upload.
And I might interject before you answer. The ARPA funds require 100 meg service in order to qualify for use of those funds.
The answer to that is no. But if you have a DSL line out in a rural area and you're getting maybe 3 megabits on a good day, if you could get 25 megabits, you think that would be great, at least for a few minutes. But you're right. We need to design a system that's going to be future-proof in the sense that it's probably going to be very serviceable for at least the next 50 years. So we think that fiber, ultimately, everyone's going to have fiber, just like everybody now has electricity. But it's a question of where do you start, and if you are putting fiber in the more densely populated areas, what about the people who are out in the rural areas? You need to give them something. So we think it's a combination. And not only that, but the fixed wireless can be used as a backup as well. So it's a combination of the two systems, the wireline, very high speed, the wireless getting connections to the more rural, sparsely populated areas, but also connecting directly to the fiber network as well to get that data back to the central office.
I see the fixed wireless as a bridge while we try to get fiber to the other areas. And again, the fixed wireless doesn't meet the standards, like Ken was saying, for spending ARPA money, so that would have to be something that we have to either work with the providers to make sure we're putting up towers in the right areas. Maybe dispatch could benefit from a couple towers, and if we position those in the right places, we'd be able to lease out space for the wireless providers and the cell providers that provide 5G as an interim fix over the next 2 to 5 years maybe, while fiber and more terrestrial-based solutions get rolled out. So it's unfortunate, but you're right, 25 by 3 isn't very fast these days, so.
Yeah, that's all I have.
Other
Thank you very
questions?
much. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Jack. Okay, we'll move on to the second business item, a financial report for August.
So on the financial report, nothing in particular to point out. It's the data through August. We're on target for most of the departments still. When I get to the bottom here. And we look at our sales tax, that's what I was trying to get to. So we continue to have good sales tax, another month in the $900,000 range. So those were pretty rare up until a couple years ago, and now we get multiple months a year in that range. And then our KIP projects are all doing well also. A couple of them slightly over budget there. Other than that, I'll leave that for the financial report unless there's a specific question on it.
Any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our third item, resolution to charge back municipalities due to illegal real estate taxes.
So we usually have a couple of these each year, and they're properties that for one reason or another should have been, typically they should have been marked exempt and didn't get exempt, so they were assigned a value and then assigned a tax when they shouldn't have. So I cut a check to pay that tax to clear the tax roll, and then we can charge it back by resolution on the next tax roll.
Questions? Or we'll entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
Second.
Supervisor Peterson, second Supervisor Ard. Any further discussion? I think this is a pretty standard fare for once a year. Any questions, any further discussion? If not, we'll go ahead and vote. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you, Denise. All right, let's move on to number 4. Resolution amending the 2021 budget for a CT scanner kit project.
All right, we'll probably have Patty or Jim talk more about this as we get up to it. So it's a budget amendment because the dollar amount is changing by a little bit anyways. And then also really the scope of the project has changed. The original scope of the project was going to be a Lodox machine, and it was contingent on a 50% matching grant. So we had thought that the Lodox would cost $500,000. We had to get a 50% grant for that, so we had a net of $250,000 for the machine, and then we had budgeted $120,000 for building improvements. So after further research and changes in technology, a different option became available, and it has cost of where we at $198,500 for the equipment, which would be a refurbished CT scanner, and then the building improvements came in higher at $189,316. So it is $17,816 net higher than what was previously budgeted. This would come out of the KIP fund balance if you approve the amendment. And then I'll leave the discussion of what this machine does compared to the original plan to our medical examiner.
So, thank you for even listening to this topic. I love it, but I don't know if you guys will get that. So, when we first had heard about digital autopsy, digital forensics, the Lodox was really the only type of technology that was. There we go. The Lodox was really the only type of technology that was out there. It was a 2D black and white single slide type of scan that really only let you look at the exterior under the skin. So you could see if there was skull fractures, you could see if there was a femur fracture, but that was about it. Fast forward 5 years that we've been talking about this, the CAT scan and CT scans is really where everything is at. And with calibration and guarantees, CT machines are really only good for so many scans of live people. So now they're refurbishing the CAT scans, and this here CAT scan machine will be good for 3,000 deceased people. So for our needs, this is a huge overall savings. And we're going to get this machine is a 3D 16 slide, so we'll actually be able to get a view of what's going on inside. So we'll be able to see the brain, we'll be able to see the heart, we'll be able to see things, which is huge. And it really is the future of forensics. And what this does is it doesn't tell us, people expect to have an answer of what happened. What it does is tell us what we can rule out. We can rule out that there's no trauma. We can rule out that there's no fractures. We can rule that out, which then helps our job. And then we can do what we do, which is base it on toxicology. So for reference, every time we bring a body over to Ramsey County, we pay $1,400 to bring it into their suite, and we pay that to Ramsey County. In the past 5 years, we've paid $340,000 to Ramsey County. And of those autopsies that we brought over, 65% were natural deaths that we could have scanned and had the answers that we wanted to. So this will be a cost savings to taxpayers as we move forward. Even with the maintenance fee, we still will come out cheaper in the long run than what we're doing now. And just to give credence as to what's going on in forensics, there are only 450 forensic pathologists in the United States. So ruling out is really what's going to be going on in the future, and doing cut downs is not going to be common practice. It is going to be set aside for crime scenes or crime investigations and children. We're not going to be autopsying everybody. So for those of us who live in northwestern Wisconsin, we have no access to any forensic pathology except for Minnesota. And that's from St. Croix County all the way across the state. So this will make us leaders in the area, and we already have other counties that are like, yes, we would bring our people to you so that we could do scans. So the partnerships are already developing, and if we don't do this, we will continue to have more and more autopsies. We have a 78% cremation rate, and that's why. Our cremation rate is incredibly high, and it is what people are doing. And without this scan, we could miss something. With this scan, we are guaranteed to have scientific data and information, and a forensic radiologist read the scan and give us all the information that we need, which then protects all the residents of St. Croix County and taxpayers. So, do you guys have any questions for me?
Supervisor Peterson?
I was just curious on that maintenance. It's pretty spendy. What?
So, well, if the machine goes down, that's the big thing. If the machine goes down, having that maintenance fee there, that's a year-to-year fee, and as we move forward, that definitely could change. For year 1 or 2, I think it's as we start learning about this, but I've already talked to health partners, and I do know that a lot of the hospitals are keeping their CAT scan machines. So there is always opportunity in the future that we can come up with partnerships and have something that evolves. We went from a Lodox to a CAT scan machine. It's not unrealistic to think 3 years from now this could change again as far as partnerships with digital forensics. So I think for the first, it's still cheaper to have that maintenance fee than it is to do autopsies. And it's a big amount of money, I get that, but in the long run, we're still going to be saving our constituents money. And the one thing that every constituent that we have here in St. Croix County that our department serves is everyone's going to die. So this here serves everybody in St. Croix County.
Of the autopsies that we send to Ramsey County, do they automatically do the autopsy, or are there situations where they determine that one isn't necessary? And if so, what is the percentage?
So we have just been notified, it was about a month or so ago, that visuals are going to be happening. So a visual is, I see no trauma, we're going to base this on toxicology. So that there, it's already going on in other counties, and we've never had that happen. Ramsey County hasn't done that to us, which I'm very grateful for. But I do know that they're doing thousands and thousands of autopsies. And we don't have a contract. They just do our autopsies. I don't know what we would do if we had a critical case that needed to be autopsied and we didn't have any place to send them. I don't know what we do. And with the CAT scan, at least we would have, with the CAT scan machine, not only would we be saving ourselves any future litigation, we could, because we would scan them in the body bag. If we saw something, we would be able to tell Ramsey County, this is why we wanted an autopsy. So it's hard to know, what's going to happen.
So I'm sorry, maybe I'll rephrase the question. Are there instances where you'll send a body to Ramsey County that they will not do a full autopsy on?
We have not had that instance happen yet. And it's, we have had conversations on the phone with the investigators in Ramsey County telling what we see. We send pictures over what we see and we talk back and forth. But we have not been to the point where either us or law enforcement is insistent on an autopsy and not have an autopsy available to us.
And then you said the CT scanner will last for about 3,000 autopsies.
Yes.
So how many do we do a year, if you remind me of that, and how long would it last?
Oh, this would last us, well, we do about 60. We're going to be pushing 60 this year. But it depends. We're one bus crash away from anything. And we are right in the flight zone of airports. There's a lot of different reasons that this is going to be a cost saver for us. But with this here, it would be set longer than any of us will be here.
Other questions? We would need a motion for the resolution.
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution amending the 2021 budget for the CT scanner kit project.
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none on a budget amendment, do we need a roll call?
No.
No. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and vote. All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Opposed. The resolution passes 4-1.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to number 5, reclassification of positions.
Good evening. So just a reminder on the process. What happens is a department head will submit a request for either a reclassification or a regrade to human resources, and then we'll audit the position and do a market analysis if necessary, and then we make our recommendation to Administrator Witt. He then makes his determination on approval or denial and then brings that here to you. And so tonight, these three have all been recommended by me and approved by Administrator Witt. So they're here before you to see about your approval. Do you want me to read through them or just answer any questions you might have?
How about a very brief synopsis?
Sure. So as you know, Justice Services is a new department. Staffing has changed, went from the sheriff's office, and so there was no staff actually in that department. And so Susan's been trying really hard to get some staff in there. And she did have an existing staff that was working, Tina Sitz, that was knowledgeable and had the background needed to be able to move into a position she's creating in the Justice Services Center. And so she wants to reclassify her from her current position into this newly created position in Justice Services. So that's Tina's. That's a reclass into what would be considered a reclass into a vacant position, a newly created vacant position. For IT, we have had the ERP analyst, or we're possibly changing that to HR and financial systems analyst, but that position has been open, I believe, since May. Since May. And we have tried to recruit for that close to 3 times. We've opened up a recruitment and not received any qualified candidates. We think John and I have been partnering on this for quite some time, and we think in part that could be because of where it's graded at a high-level IT position. And so we've evaluated it, we made some edits to the job description, and are asking for a regrade so we can try to post it again and get that position filled. It is quite a deficit to not have that. It's basically our Oracle database administrator position, and like I said, it's been vacant since May. IT has been trying their best and doing a good job of trying to cover for that position, but we really do need to backfill it with a permanent employee. And then the other position is another, so that one was a regrade. The next one in IT is a vacant position that has been vacant for a few months that John is asking to reclassify into a different position of security analyst. In part, well, mostly, that is because of the security needs that we have to make sure we're keeping our county data safe from breaches, phishing scams, things of that nature. So this is a new position that we have created in IT. And John is here if you have any specific questions for him, but I think hopefully I covered that.
Any questions? Okay, we do have a resolution someplace, don't we? Or do we?
No resolution, this is a
No
voting
resolution,
agenda
okay.
item by this committee. You're the final approving authority.
Okay. But we do need to vote. Okay. Any discussion or questions? All right, hearing none, let's vote. All those in favor of the reclassification? We do need a motion, and but there isn't a resolution, sorry.
I would move to approve the reclassifications as presented.
I would second that.
Thank you. Keeping me on track. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, Tara. Okay, move on to business item number 6, the resolution authorizing the fund balance transfer.
So annually, after we review the audit report, we take a look at our fund balances. Let me get down to the graphs here. So the general fund, unassigned fund balance, we target 35%, plus or minus 3%. That's our margin that we look for, which would be represented by those orange lines. So you can see that we're over that. So 2020 turned out to be a strong year financially, both because of the increase in sales tax revenue and a concerted effort by department heads to reduce expenses, as we didn't know what was going to be happening during the pandemic, and absolutely no training virtually going on at all. So a lot of dollars were saved in that category. So we do have a strong fund balance that's left over. I'll just quickly touch on some of the other fund balances. HHS fund balance, they went up. They're still within their range, though. If we look at highway, we should probably take a look at that policy. The giant jump here happens to coincide with the new HHS building. They're an enterprise fund. They operate just like a business does, both the healthcare campus and the highway do. So they have some book value for the building addition, or the new building that they have, which is kind of skewing the appearance of this graph. So we might take a look at how we look at the fund balance for highway and how we present that. Across the page then from them is the other enterprise fund, which is our health center fund, and that's still in the negative range. So we're waiting for their accumulation of profits to bring them back into the positive range. Back when they were in this positive range, it's not because they were more profitable back then. It was the general fund was subsidizing them and doing transfers over. At some point here, we determined we were not going to transfer any money over. And you can see they actually got pretty close here a couple of times to breaking even. And that is without fund balance transfers. So on a cash flow basis, they are doing okay. And I do have a belief that they will pull back into the positive range eventually here. The RHS fund, so you see that shot way up in 2020. That's when we closed that other HRA fund and rolled the balance into here. So that's that balance. This balance will continue to dwindle down. This fund, while it's been hovering around zero, is because we were transferring cash into that fund to cover it. It's the long-term sick leave bank payouts when employees retire. That's the only thing that comes out of here. Although we have cleared a lot of big accounts off of that fund now. So hopefully it's a little bit more manageable for the next few years. The health insurance fund continues to be strong. The balance is actually relatively stable there. So that's looking good. Workman's compensation tends to fluctuate up and down, but it's in a pretty stable spot right now. We would like to see it hit that target range, and I think it will if we can continue to have a few more good years. And then the liability insurance fund, you can see that that has an upward trajectory, had just a slight dip in 2020. We had a large payout on a settlement claim last year, if any of you remember that, which brought that balance down a little bit, but otherwise it continues to be strong. So if you look at the dollar amounts on that, the range for the general fund should be between 13 and 15 million. We're at 19 million. So I'm recommending 3.5 million be transferred out of the unassigned fund balance of the general fund and move over to the KIP fund. And we're going to talk about KIP next, but this is all part of the process, the scheme that we worked out here is that we take excess funds that the county has and we move them into the KIP fund. The benefit of that is we avoid having to issue debt. So for one thing, debt takes a lot to get the county board to approve it because it's a supermajority vote. And two, we're saving the taxpayers money because we're not paying interest expense and we're not paying debt issuance costs. So this methodology of moving the money over and being able to pay for our capital improvement projects works really well for the taxpayers. And it's a nice flow for the staff too, to know that there is a funding source that's coming in and taking care of these. When we get into the KIP, I'll show you at the bottom of the page where this is flowing in. But this is the methodology that we're looking at.
Questions? I do have one, sorry. Can you remind me, what would be, once we transfer to the KIP, can it be transferred back? If there were certain circumstances where we need to fund something else?
Yep, absolutely. So the only monies that can't be transferred back out would be debt service fund. Once monies are allocated into debt service fund, they're restricted for debt service use. I think all the other funds, you can transfer the money pretty much wherever the business decision of the county board determines they should be. Seeing court counsel isn't even here to confirm that I was right on that, but he missed his shining moment.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the resolution? We do have a resolution this time.
I'll move.
Supervisor Peterson?
Second.
Supervisor Ard, second. Any further discussion on the resolution for the fund transfer? All right, ready to vote? All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, now we will move on to number 7, approving the 2022 to 2026 capital improvement plan.
So the capital improvement planning process is lengthy. We start in May and end in November. We're right here at the September admin committee, where we're making a recommendation of the resolution. It can be, technically, it can be just approved as part of the budget, but there's a couple of pieces of the budget that we take and we approve ahead of time, and the KIP is one of them, so that we know we have one of these foundational building blocks of items that are going into the budget. They're kind of cornerstones of the budget. So knowing that we have the KIP approved sets that piece of the budget. So that's what we're looking at tonight, is the resolution that will approve the KIP. And this is based upon the committee of the whole review then. So we get to it. So you can see all of the projects. When we met at the committee of the whole, none of the projects were eliminated based upon the discussion we had. Not all of them were fully supported, but all of them garnered, I think, enough support that they would warrant continuing on in the KIP. The resolution really, though, is only approving the 2022 amounts to be included in the KIP for spending for next year. Those are the amounts that have become part of the 2022 budget that will be authorized to be spent. The other projects, 2023 and beyond that, are not authorized yet by the county board. They're only still within our planning process, but they're remaining within our view and review at this point. So some of the major projects for 2022, the $3.8 million for the government center building that's going to be built on our campus here. And then a lot of routine ones or smaller projects. And then the new Glen Hills group camping area with support facilities, $1.1 million. And that does have grant monies coming in support of that project already. We've already been awarded the grant on that. To offset some of that cost, it was $249,000 that was awarded. So those are the projects. That's where we're at in the process, and I told you I would point out where that money comes in. So we have a beginning fund balance, if you can see the tiny numbers down here at the bottom, of $3.7 million. We have $6.5 million of projects next year. 3.8 is that one project on the government center campus. Otherwise, we average right around $3 million a year in projects. So those are the projects coming out of that. We have 2 additions then to the revenue side of the KIP fund, and that's the $3.5 million that you just approved as a transfer from the unassigned fund balance. And also I'm showing here the $2.4 million of the ARPA revenue recovery money that was part of the resolution that was approved by the county board at the last meeting. So that's already been classified and moved in here. We modified that on the county board floor. That's why you didn't see it before at admin. So those revenue sources coming in, beginning balance plus those revenue minus the $6.5 million should leave us a balance of about $3 million at the end of 2022, and that will carry over to the beginning balance of 23. And assuming about $1.5 million average that we transfer into from the unassigned fund balance, we should be good for a couple more years before the cost of the projects start to exceed our fund balance. And again, this covers routine projects, smaller projects, but it does not cover large projects like if we do a government center addition. I won't be able to cash flow that. But that is the summary of the KIP.
Questions? I know we've all seen these numbers before. and they are a result of the committee of the whole. So if there were any changes, I guess I would suggest that those be entertained within the full board. So I would move to approve there is a resolution here, correct? Yes, there is. I found it. I would move to approve the resolution approving the capital improvement projects and providing for 2022 KIP funding.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Okay. Ready to vote? All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you for that summary, Ken. All right, we're ready to move on to number 8, review the 2022 department budget request.
Yeah. So at each of the standing committees, we break the budget into the different departments that report to those standing committees. So this is a piece of the budget. Overall for the budget, though, we take a look at the new monies that are coming into the county, where our sources and where our uses. So the two primary revenue sources we have that I'm looking at is net new construction that allows us to increase our property tax. It's actually been revised since I've wrote this to 2.2%, which is about 9,000 more. So we're up to about 660,000 in property tax money that's available. And then sales tax. So I've projected a $500,000 increase in sales tax growth that we can safely budget for. So those are the primary revenue sources that are increasing. Then we look at how that's going to be used in the 2022 budget. The county board established priorities for us. Health insurance was the top priority. We received a 5.6% recommendation for our premium increase, which will cost the county, for our 90% of that premium, $550,000. Employee compensation was the second priority that the county board established for me. So we wanted to make sure that we budgeted a step increase if at all possible, which we were able to do. But that step increase cost me $700,000. So you can see my two revenue sources are now consumed. So the third priority that the county board had established was new positions. I had received 15 new position requests, and that's going to be the next agenda item. But out of those 15 requests, we ended up with a net of 3.37 new positions. So there's a lot of people that did not get the positions that they need or wanted for their departments. And then when we get to operating expenses are, if they have to have it, they have to have it. I mean, sometimes they're contractual and I really don't have any choice. Those are built into the budget as needed. So there were a couple of small operating type expense items that we ended up cutting out. One of them was from facilities. When we get there, I can point it out, but we eliminated $55,000 for duct cleaning. So that was a project that the facilities director wanted to do, and I'm going to end up cutting that out of the county administrator recommended budget because it was an operating expense and that was fourth on the list. So that was one of the things that ended up being removed. So if we look at the individual budgets, the first one here is Corporation Council, but the way you want to look at them is the very first line on each one is the general property taxes. So if you come over to the column fiscal year 21, the general property tax was $617,000. Fiscal year 22, the general property tax is $603,000. So this is the amount of taxpayer support that's needed in order to run this department. They don't have other revenue sources, and it's the plug number to make that cost center break even. So you can see this one decreased. So they had decreasing expenses, which are beneficial then for putting the budget together and for the taxpayer. So that's kind of how I look at it. I first look at that first line to see if it's a red flag for me, if it went way up. And then if it did, then I want to take a look at where were the increases. Was it in the net wages and fringes? You can see there was a $16,000 decrease in the net wages and fringes for Corporation Council. They had some change in staff, which had different cost implications for us. And then you look at the bottom line of the operating expenses, they went from 23,000 to 24,000, just a very tiny increase there. So those are the points going down the page that we would look at. So I'll just quickly go through the different cost centers then. We have county administration dropped by a little over $20,000. There was a change in staffing within that department for a position that was split between finance and county administration. So you're going to see a decrease there, a significant decrease in the net wages and fringes. And then there was a slight increase in the operating expenses where we went from 56 to 88. A lot of that was increases in requests from my public information officer. I'll throw him under the bus here. So he has some new programs and ideas, and there's a lot of communication within strategic planning. So he tells me that those things cost money. So we did put some money in the 2022 budget. We used our offset of the salary savings that we had for that. The 1010 budget, this is unallocated. This is contingency fund. So we have $100,000 that we're carrying through for the contingency fund, same as it was prior years. Health insurance fund, this is all funded through insurance premiums that either departments are paying into the fund at 90% or employees are paying into the fund at 10% of the cost. So you can see, that went from 9.7 to 10.2 million. So that continues to go up as we have inflationary factor within health insurance. HRA, this is on here only because we have some prior year information that still has to roll off before it'll disappear, but this fund is no longer used. The RHS fund, this is the Retiree Health Savings Long-Term Sick Bank payouts. If you see through August 23rd, when this report was run, we had paid out $526,000, whereas we budget $250,000. But one of those payouts was over $200,000 alone. That was the big one to get off the books. So the rest of them are a lot smaller than that going forward. So hopefully this number becomes more viable as we proceed on. But that's also why we transferred that HRA fund balance in there, is because we knew some of these costs were coming up. 1540, this is our liability insurance fund. If you remember, we talked about they had a nice arc on their fund balance other than the very small dip that they had last year. We are seeing double-digit increases in our insurance premiums. We self-insure for a large portion. We have a $500,000 deductible on our liability insurance claims, and we reinsure over that. But those premiums are increasing, and really the driving factor in government insurance right now is law enforcement settlements. So not that we've had any, but they're affecting the reinsurance pools, and that's where we're seeing the increases. Those court settlements are very large. Uh, 1545 is the workers' compensation. You can see just a small increase there. It's really variable based. We didn't change the rates that we're charging at all. It's just based upon total payroll. So as payroll goes up, you see an increase in this also. So a very small increase. Otherwise, I think we're doing okay on workers' compensation. County boards and departments, 165 to 166 is the general property tax. Virtually no change in there. This is where your per diems and other type of expenses come out of. The county clerk, 186 to 197. So we're seeing a small increase there. We did show a small decrease in clerk fees by 5,000. Net wages and fringes were up by about 7,000. So, we do have wage increases, we do have health insurance increases, so that's not unusual to see an increase there. And then the operating expenses were actually down by a couple thousand. If you have questions along the way, feel free to stop me. The dog fund, it's in and out. We have a very small amount that we end up retaining. We just keep it in a separate fund for records management. Elections, similarly, we keep it in a separate fund, so it's easy to manage those costs. That bounces every other year up and down based upon the number of elections. So you see a large increase, but next year you'll see a large decrease as we swing back the other way. Human resources, we went from 547 to 550, so not very much net change there. Net wages and fringes were the same. They have some staff turnover in there, but the total cost is running about the same as it was. And then again, operating expenses were within a couple $1,000s of each other. Information technology, 2.3 million to 2.4. Before you get too excited, there was some cost transfers from finance where we transferred the maintenance and the position, the ERP analyst position that we talked about earlier tonight, from the finance department to the IT department. So that accounts for a lot of that increase. So it wasn't all because John wanted it, it's because John got it. So that's primarily what the change is within that department. And you will see a corresponding decrease in the finance, which is here. We went from 729 to 596. So if you add those two together, they don't quite match up, but yeah. The decrease wasn't nearly as much as the increase. I don't know how that always seems to work that way, but
Software contracts.
yeah. So finance, we're seeing the decrease from that transfer out. Otherwise, there wasn't much that changed within the finance. Default. So the default is how we balance the budget throughout for the revenues. So all the other revenues that we come in, we show as a negative general property tax because that's how it's redistributed out. So it's an accounting method that we use to show a total cost for each of the departments. If you added all of the general property taxes from each of the departments, it's more than our property tax, because part of that is sales tax. So this is how we account for that. We put in a negative property tax here, and this zeroes out all the revenues. The negative plus all the positives equals zero, and that's how it's redistributed throughout the budget. Leah keeps track of it, and she assures me it's all good. The county treasurer, you'll see a negative amount here on general property tax. So similar to that sales tax, that's a revenue source. The treasurer has more revenues than what their department costs. So they're contributing back into that pool of money. So the interest and the penalties on taxes, as well as the treasurer's fees, those revenues are more than what the treasurer's department cost. They don't get to keep all of that revenue and spend it. We make them put that into the pool and share with everybody else. Their costs are relatively similar to the previous year. I think you had a couple smaller line items that were up, but nothing too significant. Facilities, so we do see a 1.8 to a $2 million increase. So there is some increase within this budget. If we take a look at the, let's get to the net wages and fringes. So 947 to $1,069,000. So there is some cost increases in this budget. A lot of it's, yeah, there wasn't too much of the increase in health insurance. That's probably the largest one that's up, but it's the decrease in the interdepartmental chargeback from the prior year. That's why we're seeing that increased allocation. And I think that's a correction to how we were charging the healthcare campus for some of that staff that's shared between the facilities and the healthcare campus. If we look at the other expenses, though, you'll also see some increases in there. Some of it is with contract services. So other contractual services you see from 250 to 363. Building maintenance from 140 to 195. So he is seeing some cost pressures, both from building and material supply costs, contractor costs, the cleaning contract that we have. And also included in that was that $55,000 that I mentioned before for duct cleaning, something that I going to be removing in the county administrator recommended budget. So you can see that there are increasing costs and demands by the different departments for when those costs go up. Most of these departments we went through, I said there wasn't very much in there. Most of it was at public protection. If you sat through that meeting, it didn't go nearly as smoothly as this one's going because there was a lot more discussion there. Fleet vehicles, this is an in and out. It'll balance out to zero. It's the expenses for the fleet vehicles, and then we charge that as a mileage rate back to the departments, and that's how the revenues offset the expenses for that fund. And that is the last of them under this part of the budget review. So out of all the budgets, I do have to cut $1.8 million out of the request. So when we talked about the number of positions that I was going to be cutting, there was $1 million of requests. A lot of those were not able to be worked into the 2022 budget, so that's where a large portion of that came from. But there is, $800,000 of other expenses that are being cut. Not very much from these budgets at all. Like I said, public protection was the biggest one. They probably had 80 to 90% of the increase in the total budgets. HHS probably had the bulk of the rest of it.
So, I mean, maybe I'm getting ahead to the new positions for the next budget item, but I'm concerned that 1.8 million, are we cutting or not approving any critical staff additions that will impact the services we deliver to our citizens?
Yeah, I think if you look at some of the requests, and again, they're mostly probably public protection. So maybe if there's no other questions on this budget, we can move into that. All right. This is really informational. If there's something that was very important to you that says, make sure you don't cut that, Ken, or, we think this is excess, you should really look at that closer. That's what this part of the budget review process is for. All right, so if we look at the 15 positions that were requested, so which ones are a no on there for the county administrator recommendation? So the clerk of courts had requested 2 positions, and I'm recommending 1. So is there going to be an effect on service delivery? And you're going to see this in a lot of the positions because we have the district attorney on here and child support and law enforcement. That's just a growing cost center area for the county. As the population's growing, the amount of flow through the judicial system grows with it. Citations grow, and it really seems to be proportional to that population growth. So we are seeing a lot of service demand pressures within these cost centers. So is there an immediate impact right now if those positions are not filled? Well, maybe not. It's hard to tell. That's fairly subjective. You can look at the number of cases handled per person within the office and do a backward analysis and say, well, see, this is how much more they have to work now because of that caseload. But technology has changed over that period of time also. They've gone to full electronic. Some of the technology changes have actually increased the workload. So the new technology that's in the courtrooms actually takes the clerk of court staff longer to assist the judicial judges with managing that and making sure it's working correctly and operating it. So there's trade-offs both ways. So I am honoring one of the 2 clerk of courts because we do see that as an area that we have increasing needs. So I think that will help in that area. The medical examiner, she'd asked for half-time on that program support. So we are seeing increased caseload within the medical examiner's office. The half-time position was just added 2 years ago. So this position was right on the bubble for me. In one of my earlier versions of the budget, I actually had it in there to add that position, but as we ended up making final cuts, I removed it. So there's a need. but can they get by another year without it? Well, they're going to have to, because we have to prioritize how the dollars are spent. Justice Services, so this is a shift from the Corrections Department operating the Day Report Center to a civilian-run Justice Services. So we eliminated 3 positions out of the Corrections Department. Those 3 positions were added over the last 5 years to Corrections, specifically for the Day Report Center. So we're eliminating them back out and creating 4 positions within the Justice Services. There was actually 5 positions from Corrections that were running the DRC. And we're going to try it with 4 civilians, but they were also doing Huber electronic monitoring. And so that's gone to a contract service for the Sheriff's Department rather than jail staff doing it. So the jail is getting some FTEs back that way through those coming back into the jail that we're doing the Huber. And we're creating the 4 in Justice Services, 2 of which though are ARPA funded, which means that their funding is for 2 years. So then we're down to 2 in Justice Services, and that's probably not going to be sufficient, but I'm using the ARPA dollars to stretch us a little bit into the future years. So those will be positions that need to be filled with tax levy dollars by the time that 2 years comes to an end. When we look at District Attorney, they had a request for a position. So again, it's that same area where we're seeing increasing caseloads through law enforcement into the court system. District Attorney sees that also. They were awarded an additional ADA a year ago that came on and is staffed now. Part of the reason, though, that I didn't fill this one was they really have no space to put anyone anyways. So if we added an additional position, they'd probably be sitting in the hallway typing, because I'm not quite sure where we would place them. But that'll get back to discussion for future months coming up here. But part of the growth of the county and the growth of the staff is hindered by the space limitations that we have. So part of the reason that one wasn't filled was because of space that's available. Child support, I did recommend the filling of this one. I know the total position cost is about just under $24,000, but it's 66% funded through the child support revenues they charge back to the state government. So really our net cost was about $7,000 on that. So it was the best bang for our buck for the last $7,000 that I had available to spend, and that's where it went. Law enforcement. So law enforcement, we haven't added additional road deputies for some time. And I really think that to do it justice, we're never going to be able to do it through our tax levy with the amount that we have come available every year. And I've been thinking about this, but I think what the recommendation is going to be is that when we determine that we really do want to add additional deputies, and it takes 4 to add 1 per shift. So add 4 bodies, you add 1 deputy per shift. That's how it works out. So when you're going to add 4, you're going to add 8, you want to add 1 to 2 deputies per shift. We would have to go to a referendum, because that would be, if you add 8, that's $1 million. So we will never have $1 million of extra money to spend in any year, even if we did nothing else. So I think that's how it's going to have to be done. And at some point, we're going to get to that point. I don't know if we're there yet, but I think we're probably getting close to it. Zoning. The zoning request that we had from community development, and I know zoning code enforcement is an issue. It came up quite a bit during strategic planning. The vacancies that we have there, though, and the new staff that we've had, really, I think it's just a learning curve and efficiency rate that we haven't hit. So I would really rather see us fully staffed and have those staff there a year or 2 trained to evaluate whether the current staffing level is sufficient or not sufficient. They're overworked because of the vacancies and because they haven't fully learned their job. They haven't hit their maximum potential yet in that position. So that's why that one was not filled. Parks, They do have increasing demand for parks as we're adding additional properties into the park system. But you could see from support of parks from the county board overall is not as great as there are other areas of the budget. And if you look at where our mandated services are, parks is not a mandated service. So it did end up lower on the scale, and that position did not get filled. We get into the HHS positions. There was a request for a .87 to be rolled into a full-time, both in behavioral health and in the ADRC. I didn't end up filling those. I prioritized that child support one. I got a better, more FTE for the dollar amount. That's how come I went with that one over these two. And they're at .87 already. We're already paying benefits. It's just a marginal cost to increase them for the few extra hours a year. But they didn't make the cut this year. Where we did add was children's services. So they asked for two things. One is a program support associate, and the other one is a social worker too. I asked Bob which one was more important. It was the social worker too. This position would be out-of-home child placement. That's where we're seeing an increase in caseload. That's where I prioritize one of the few positions that we were able to afford for a position that will directly deal with that caseload. And then the last one was Health and Human Services Administration for a finance associate too. So we see other counties that in their HHS filings, if they're not filing accurately, the state can come back after them. What was it, La Crosse or Eau Claire, or both of them? Yeah, ended up paying like $1 million back. So we want to make sure that we don't end up in that case. They think that they can actually generate more revenues, that there's maybe some potential lost opportunity on some of our funding, that with an additional finance staff, we can actually generate more revenue through HHS, capture some that we're maybe missing. And then with the ARPA dollars, the 2.1 million that we're putting into HHS for different grants there, again, just more grant management that's going to be going on. So that's why that was one of the positions that I was funded. So back to your question, Supervisor Long, was are we not funding some things that we should be because of the priority order or other budget decisions that we have? So yes, maybe we are, but I think I've put together the best recommendation I can with the resources that we have available and honoring the budget priorities that the county board set forth. And I think that we'll be okay for another year.
Supervisor Peterson.
I think it makes sense to more or less hold the line like you have. I think the budget, we need to keep it in line, considering the fact that we're going to be taking a look at a building recommendation one way or the other, and there'll probably be enough really resistance anyway. So I think being fiscally responsible with the budget, we'll see where the recommendations, and if it does get passed, may make some consideration differences on the staffing needs anyway. So just my thought.
I guess I would kind of voice some concerns over some of these positions that we know we're going to need to fill, especially in the law enforcement area. And I am concerned about that, and I know that this is a result of the budget priorities that were set by the board, which I personally didn't agree with. But I suppose I'm hoping that we'll be okay for next year to make sure that we can fill some of these, because I just am really concerned that it might impact our services. And we are a service organization, so I'm just concerned about it. Supervisor Cook?
Ken, is the referendum really our only other option to go look at some of these positions significantly? Are there other financial options? I mean, I appreciate Supervisor Long's question about looking at the impact on services. I mean, I tend to think, I think county staff know that the board wants to be fiscally conservative. We're not going to tend to hire a bunch of staff just because they want them. I think they're probably asking because in many cases they really need them, especially given the growth in the county. So I just want to make sure that we're maintaining that service, and I'm trying to understand what our options are.
Yeah. I think when you look at how we spend the new money, taxpayer money that we get in every year, either sales tax or property tax, think about it from a marketing standpoint if you're thinking about a referendum. So legal secretaries in the DA's office are not a great selling point if you're going to go ask the taxpayers for a referendum to increase. If you're adding deputies onto the road, there's a much more direct impact for the taxpayer. It's something that they see that they're going to be able to use, more visual for them. They're going to have a better understanding of that. So your referendum chances are going to go up by quite a bit. So that's how come I would take a look at deputies, patrol deputies, that way as compared to a lot of the other positions we have. We can, 1 and 2 additional positions over the next 5 to 10 years and get to the same point. But because we have so many needs, you're going to have to prioritize one way or the other. I think if you're going to make a big impact, referendum is going to be the way to go. But I would be selective about what you choose to put on that referendum.
Other questions or comments, other discussion?
If I could just wrap up the bottom part of this page then. So I went through the new positions. There were 4 positions that were eliminated then. One was an HVAC technician that we eliminated, went to a contract service for $30,000 a year. So there's some cost savings there. The other was the 3 correctional positions from the DRC that we created to civilian. Also, we're looking at 12-hour shifts for the jail and for patrol. So you go from 2,080 hours for patrol, I think it's 2,068 in the jail, to 2,184 regular worked hours on a 12-hour shift schedule. So you're actually gaining 104 hours per year per deputy. So when you multiply that out by all the deputies that we have, divided by 2,080 hours on average, you end up with additional 1.5 FTEs on the road and 1.67 FTEs in the jail. So that's creating additional staffing without adding staffing. So I think that's an important management tweak that we're doing here to provide some of the need that we have for coverage without actually adding additional people onto the payroll.
Good. Real quick question. What's the sheriff's opinion of that option, just making people work more hours?
Yeah. It was requested by the sheriff. There's some additional benefits to the 12-hour shift. There are some negatives also. The additional benefits are it's really easy to schedule. So there's 24 hours a day. There's 2 shifts a day. So it actually makes things really easy to schedule. The schedule also becomes very consistent. So you have the same days off on, it's either a 2 or a 4-week rotation. You end up with a routine that happens. So that's beneficial for the deputies. The 12-hour shifts tend to reduce the total amount of overtime because of the structure of them. Less people call in, or they're able to flex more because you have more that are on at a particular time. And I think it comes out to 7.5 deputies per shift, both in patrol and jail. So at any given day, any hour of the day, there's 7.5 that are theoretically available on the shift, minus that PTO and sick time then to get down to what you're actually at. So you do reduce overtime with that. Those 12-hour shifts, though, are long days. And, in those work settings, they can be very long days. That's the downside of it. But it was a request by the sheriff, actually, to go to the 12-hour shift. And we're negotiating that with the union right now, but they've seemed amenable to the idea at the bargaining table. And the bottom there was just a recap of other changes that were made through the year. HR and admin changes, and then adding the epidemiologist earlier in the year with budget amendments. So this item is only a report. So I'm required to report to you new positions that are going to be included in the county administrator recommended budget. So sort of like the capital improvement plan and one of the cornerstones of that budget, new positions are a cornerstone of that budget. So you get an early look at that so that if I'm off track, you can get me back on the tracks before we get the budget finalized. And that way we have a good product at the end. So if this looks, like a workable plan, then we can move on. If you have suggestions or changes, you say, no, you should swap these two positions, then you should let me know that now.
Any other comments, questions? I think we're good.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move on to the last item, the resolution updating the wage grid.
All right. So there's a couple of things that we're trying to do with this grid amendment. I'm going to go down to the grid first, maybe. So again, cornerstone of the budget, these changes to the grid reflect things that we're building into the budget. So we want to make sure that these changes are meet your expectations. That way we have a good budget product at the end. So you see the grayed out column here. So step 2 is grayed out. So what we're doing is we're eliminating that step off of the budget grid. And we're adding onto the right-hand side here, we'll slide over the column that's in red, step 20. So we've done, this will be the third time we've done exactly this. We've eliminated the bottom step and we've added a step at the end. When we can't COLA adjust the grid and raise all of the wages up, what we can do is we can shift the grid to the right, and that keeps it market competitive. So that's one of the techniques that we're using in lieu of COLA adjustments to keep the grid viable long-term for the county. Anybody that was in a step 2 will be moved out of that step. They'll be moved up to step 3. And then we're also going to shift where the market rate is right now. It's currently at step 6. We're going to move that over to step 8. We haven't moved it previously. That's why we're jumping 2 steps with that. The only thing the market rate says, it's really an internal policy use. Our personnel policy says the human resource director can approve a wage, a starting wage up to the market rate, and anything over the market rate the county administrator has to approve. So this is just giving room for the HR director to operate. So the other changes to the grid then, so that's one thing we're doing to the grid. The other thing that we're doing to the grid is the other grayed out steps that you see here, and they're mostly at the beginning. We're eliminating any dollar amount on the grid that's below $15. The one red right here, it was just 2 cents off, so we just adjusted that to 15. But we're eliminating that 15 or below $15 range. 2 reasons I'd say that we're doing it. One is we found it very difficult this past year with seasonal staff to fill the positions. Both parks and highway, we're going to run the summer without staff because they just could not fill at rates below 15. So we authorized them to start at the $15 rate, and we were able to get those positions filled. But that was at the maximum part of the scale that they had before. Steps 11 through 20 previously didn't exist on that top section of rows. So we filled that out. Maybe I should have put those in red, but we filled that out to create those new steps that are over $15. And then if we're doing that for seasonal employees, the other thing is we do have some positions, not a lot. A lot of them are not seasonal, but temporary positions or part-time positions, I mean, that we have, or some starting CNA level positions that we have at the healthcare campus that are below 15. And so if we're going to go 15 on the seasonals, I thought, in all fairness, equity amongst all county employees, that we should just establish that as our minimum rate that we would pay. So those are the changes that we're making. We'll slide back to the background note because I got a few more details on there. So if you say who is being affected by that change, so we had 5 CNAs, 9 PCAs, 3 activity aides, 1 housekeeper, 15 ADRC transportation drivers, 6 nutrition program aides, 8 office staff and the treasurer, civilian bailiff, and then the seasonal parks and highway employees. That's who that's affecting. The dollar amount on this really is not very consequential because a lot of these are not heavily used positions. They don't have a lot of hours on them. And the rate increase is not that big of an increase. It's $1 or less than $1 that they're going up. So the fiscal impact wasn't very great to make this change. So those are the requested changes that I have to the wage grid.
Supervisor Ard.
I do have a comment regarding the CNAs or PCAs or nutrition, housekeeping, laundry. A $15 an hour wage sounds very good. Unfortunately, it's not. We're not competitive whatsoever. I have had over 12 clients that I have been working with Workforce Resource. They will not apply. They can go right across the street and they're making $21, $25 an hour. We're not competitive in our healthcare system in St. Croix County. And if they go to the Twin Cities, which several of them have, it's worth the drive because some of them are starting within Presbyterian homes or the St. Mary's respite, and those are starting at $23, $24 an hour with benefits. We're just not able to compete.
And I agree that we are in a very competitive market. What we have been doing is bringing in people higher than step 2, 3, and 4. And like Ken said, I can approve up to step 8. And typically for our healthcare campus staff, if they have the experience and the certifications, we are approving them to start higher than 2, 3, 4, and 5. We can also look at if we need to be evaluating those positions for some sort of regrade. But until that happens, we support the healthcare campus by allowing them to bring people in at a higher step than those entry-level steps, because we recognize that we're competing with people that are paying higher.
Then truly, in the recruitment efforts, that needs to be known, because anyone who's out in the market looking for a position, they're looking at what the starting wage might be or what they're hearing from someone who is currently working or has been working there. There's nothing to attract them. And so they're going where they know. The word travels very quickly in these employment circles. And I was amazed to find out how much of a gap there was, especially in the healthcare field, for what are considered to be low-level paying jobs, and they are. But essentially, a PCA and a CNA, they're taking care of our most valuable assets, but we're paying them the same that McDonald's is paying someone to flip burgers. That's a little disturbing.
Right. One other option that we have as well that we can do, and we've done it with other positions, is we post the the range, the full range of the position, but we can also put expected hiring range and start that higher potentially, so they know that there is an option to start higher until we can change it somehow else. So for recruiting, we are looking at some other ways to make sure we're communicating about what we offer, and some of the, we're working on marketing materials for that to help better with recruitment right now. But I agree, we do need to evaluate the healthcare workers, because it is hard to compete with someone that can work at Taco Bell for the same price.
Other questions or comments? Okay, well, I'll move to approve the resolution updating the wage grid. Do we have a second? Supervisor Peterson? Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you, Ken. And Tara. Okay, so I guess that concludes our business items. Any requests for future agenda items?
Mr. Chair, I sent out some correspondence, and I don't want to talk about the details, but it may be necessary for the committee to have a special meeting within the next approximately 3.5 weeks. So look for that. Look for my office or the administrator's office to contact you about the availability for that meeting.
Thank you, Scott. Any announcements or correspondence?
It looks like we will be scheduling a committee of the whole meeting to review the budget. We are looking at Monday, October 11th at 8:30 a.m., a morning meeting for that budget review. So we'll get a notice out on that shortly.
Okay, one more thing to look forward to. Okay.
Supervisor Long?
Yes.
I got one announcement to make. We are, the IT department has migrated almost all of the county over to two-factor authentication. What that involves is a PIN to be sent to your email address or your cell phone when you try to log into the Microsoft applications. We're going to be, the board is the last group of players that we haven't invited to that yet. So you will be getting an email from the help desk in the next week or so inviting you to join onto the two-factor authentication. That'll help cut down on the fake emails that come from Dave Peterson. It'll help. It won't eliminate, but it'll help. And the compromised attacks that we're getting. So when you see that come through, it is not a phishing campaign. It is official. And if it's asking you to contact the help desk for assistance, go ahead and do that next time you're in the building, or if you want to do it while you're at home, feel free to do it that way. Okay?
Thank you, Jen. I like how you termed that an invitation.
It's an invitation.
That's great. Okay, I better ask once again, are there any other announcements or correspondence? Did I miss anybody? Okay, with that, we'll adjourn the meeting at 6:38, and the date of our next regularly scheduled meeting will be Tuesday, October 19th. Thank you all.